A racist white man steals from a blind black man. He is shocked when he discovers that someone witnessed the entire event. The city square was quieter than usual, with only a few people passing by, their footsteps echoing faintly off the cobblestone. A light breeze ruffled fallen leaves around the fountain at the center. Miles Anderson stood by his usual spot, his fingers lightly tracing the edge of his saxophone, feeling its familiar weight, its comfort. His other hand reached out, brushing the smooth surface of his tip jar to make sure it was in place. It was empty, but that didn't bother him. Not yet. The music would take care of that, as it always did. With a small smile, Miles tilted his head, listening to the subtle hum of the city, then lifted the saxophone to his lips and began to play. Notes drifted into the air, weaving between buildings, filling the square with a low, soulful melody. He could feel it, the warmth spreading through his chest, the release in every note. Playing in this square was a ritual, a way of speaking without words, his voice echoing in the places his eyes couldn't reach. As he played, he sensed someone standing nearby. He was used to it. People often paused to listen. He let the music do the talking, filling the silence, until a voice broke through, rough and edged with a sneer. "Nice setup you got here," the man said, his tone heavy with sarcasm. Miles kept playing, trying to ignore the interruption, but the man didn't move on. "Must be easy money for someone like you. Just sit here and play a little tune, right?" The music faltered slightly, but Miles steadied himself, letting the melody flow on. He knew this tone. He'd heard it before. The arrogance, the mocking lilt that never led anywhere good. He kept his eyes forward, focusing on the saxophone, pretending not to hear. "Oh, come on," the man continued, louder now, stepping closer. "I know you can hear me." He let out a laugh, sharp and cutting. "What's wrong? Cat got your tongue? Or is it just easier to pretend?" Miles lowered his saxophone, turning slightly toward the voice. "Can I help you?" His words were calm, deliberate, giving away none of the unease building inside. The man laughed again, a hollow sound that bounced off the walls around them. "You know, I didn't expect you to actually talk. Thought you'd just sit there, like a good little performer." Miles took a slow breath, his fingers tightening slightly on his saxophone. "If you're not here to listen to the music, then maybe you should keep moving." "Oh, I'm listening," the man replied, his voice dripping with mock enthusiasm. "I just find it funny, you know? The way people like you get by. You don't do any real work, just sitting around hoping people feel sorry enough to throw you some change." Miles felt the sting of the words, but he kept his voice steady. "It's not about pity. People who want to listen, they listen. The tips, they're just a thank you." "A thank you?" the man snorted. "More like charity." Miles straightened his back, refusing to let the man's words burrow in. "Call it whatever you want. I don't need your approval." The man's shoes scuffed against the cobblestone as he took a step closer, his shadow passing over Miles's face. "Oh, I know that," he said with a nasty chuckle. "Blind as a bat, huh? Funny how you end up here begging with no one to actually see you. Kind of ironic, don't you think?" Miles clenched his jaw, his grip tightening around his saxophone. He'd spent years dealing with people like this, people who saw his blindness as a weakness, who thought it made him helpless, lesser. "I play because I love it. I'm not here for people like you." "Well, I'm here for people like you," the man replied, his tone colder now, a cruel smile evident in his voice. "Because people like you need to know your place." Miles held his ground, lifting his head, listening carefully to the man's shifting weight, the disdain in his voice. He took a slow breath, channeling the tension into his words, keeping them steady. "My place is right here. I have just as much right to be here as anyone." The man snickered, leaning in close enough that Miles could feel the edge of his breath. "We'll see about that," he muttered before walking away, his footsteps echoing ominously as he left. Miles held still, his pulse pounding in his ears. He lifted the saxophone back to his lips and began to play, the melody shakier now, but still steady. In a way, it was his answer, his defiance, a reminder to himself that his music, his place, was his to hold on to. Miles continued to play, determined not to let the man's words linger. The melody smoothed out, steadying his nerves. But just as he began to lose himself in the music again, he heard the man's footsteps returning, slow and deliberate, crunching over the fallen leaves. Back again, Miles kept his voice steady, though he felt a flicker of frustration. The man let out a chuckle, dripping with smugness. "I thought I'd stick around. Thought maybe I'd miss something the first time." Miles didn't answer, returning to his song, letting each note answer in place of words. The man hovered close, silent for a moment, listening. Then, with a sudden movement, he kicked the tip jar, sending it clattering across the cobblestones. Coins scattered everywhere, their metallic clinks sharp in the quiet square. "Oops," the man said, feigning surprise. "Guess I didn't see that there." Miles stopped playing, the music cutting off abruptly as he lowered his saxophone. He heard the coins rolling away, heard the man's mocking laugh over the scattered jingling. "Why did you do that?" Miles's voice was low, controlled, though anger simmered beneath. "Oh, relax," the man sneered. "It's just a few coins. Nothing important, right? Those coins are how I live," Miles replied, his words slow and deliberate. "What's your problem?" "My problem?" The man sounded amused, his footsteps crunching closer. "You're my problem. People like you who think you're entitled to just take up space. Take people's hard-earned money for, what, playing a little song? Must be nice not having to work for it." Miles took a steadying breath. "You don't know anything about me." "Oh, I know enough." The man crouched down, and Miles could hear him picking up the scattered coins. "It's just easy money for you, isn't it? Standing here with your hand out, waiting for people to pity you." Miles tightened his grip on his saxophone, struggling to keep his calm. "It's not pity. They appreciate the music. That's all it is." "Appreciate the music," the man repeated with a mocking laugh, pocketing some of the coins as he spoke. "Yeah, right. They just feel sorry for you. Poor blind guy, sitting all alone in a square. Makes them feel good about themselves, throwing you a few pennies. You're a charity case, that's all." Miles set his jaw, his voice steady but laced with anger. "I didn't ask for your opinion. Maybe not," the man sneered. "But I'm giving it anyway." He clinked more coins together, jingling them in his hand. "You think you're some kind of artist, but you're just another street beggar. Taking up space, just sitting around waiting for handouts." Miles clenched his fists, trying to keep his breathing steady. "If you don't like what I do, then leave." "Oh, I'm going," the man said, his voice thick with mock cheerfulness. "Just thought I'd take a little tip for my troubles." He pocketed the rest of the coins he'd gathered and then, with a final taunting laugh, stood up. Miles tried to keep his composure, his voice low and controlled. "Put the money back." The man paused, feigning surprise. "Put it back? Why? What are you going to do about it?" Miles stood his ground, refusing to let his anger show. "It's not yours." "Oh, come on. It's not like you're going to miss a few coins." The man laughed, the sound grating. "What are you going to do, call for help? Scream for someone to come save you?" Miles's voice came out in a harsh whisper. "I don't need anyone to save me. Just leave me alone." The man took a slow step back, finally dropping his mocking tone. "Maybe you should go somewhere else then. This place isn't for you. People like you don't belong here." Miles felt a cold anger settle over him. "I have every right to be here," the man sneered, looking Miles up and down. "Sure. Keep telling yourself that." He turned and began to walk away, laughing to himself as he pocketed the last of the coins he'd picked up. As the man's footsteps faded, Miles took a shaky breath, steadying himself. But he didn't pick up his saxophone. Instead, he stood there, feeling the emptiness around him, the quiet that settled over the square once more, his anger simmering just below the surface. Miles stood in silence, gripping his saxophone tightly, the air around him tense and heavy. The sound of that man's mocking laughter still lingered in his ears, like an unpleasant aftertaste that wouldn't fade. He began to kneel down, his hands reaching out to feel for the scattered coins, brushing the cool cobblestone as he gathered a few into his hand. Just as he was about to retrieve another coin, the man's footsteps returned, echoing back through the square. "Oh, still at it, huh?" The man's voice was thick with derision, scraping around on the ground like a dog. Fitting, really. Miles didn't respond, swallowing down the anger that surged inside him. He kept his hands busy, focusing on feeling each coin, pushing himself to ignore the man's taunts. But the man was relentless, moving closer, his shoes scuffing against the cobblestones. "Guess you're pretty desperate, huh?" the man continued. He knelt down beside Miles, his hand reaching out and grabbing the few coins Miles had managed to collect. "Here, let me help you out." Miles jerked his hand back instinctively, holding the few coins he'd managed to collect close to his chest. "Stop it! That's enough!" The man chuckled, as though amused by Miles's resistance. "Come on, what are you going to do? Just sit there and let me take it? You can't even see me." Miles set his jaw, struggling to keep his voice steady. "I don't need to see you to know what you are." The man laughed, an ugly sound that echoed through the square. "And what am I, huh? A hard-working man, not some beggar sitting around waiting for handouts." Miles clenched his fist around the coins, the cold metal pressing into his skin. "You don't know me, and you don't know the first thing about hard work." "Oh, don't I?" the man sneered, pocketing a few more coins. "I work every day. I earn my pay. I don't just sit here mooching off other people's pity." Miles tightened his grip, feeling his frustration build. "And yet here you are, stealing from someone who's done nothing to you. Some hard-working man you are." The man stiffened at that, his sneer fading for just a moment before returning, sharper this time. "Watch your mouth. You think you're better than me? Sitting here, playing your little tunes, acting like you're some kind of artist?" Miles shook his head, the anger he'd tried so hard to contain slipping into his voice. "I don't think I'm better than anyone, but at least I have enough dignity to earn what I get honestly." The man's face twisted, his expression ugly with rage. Without warning, he reached out, snatching the tip jar right out of Miles's reach. "If it's so honest, let's see how you do without this." He shook the jar mockingly. "Oh, wait. How would you know?" Miles's heart pounded as he reached out instinctively, feeling for the jar. "Give that back." The man let out a harsh laugh, holding the jar just out of reach. "Come and get it then." Miles's hands fell to his sides, fists clenching as he forced himself to breathe through the frustration. He'd always tried to handle himself calmly, always tried to rise above people like this, but this man was pushing him to the edge. "People like you don't deserve anything," the man muttered, his voice dripping with contempt. "Think the world owes you something just because you've got a disability, or because, well, you know, people like you. Always looking for an excuse, always crying, 'Woe is me.'" Miles's breath was shaky, his anger raw now. "You think you're better than me because of your skin color? Because you're not blind? That's all you've got?" The man stopped, his laugh replaced by a chilling silence. "I don't have to explain myself to you." He took a step back, still holding the jar. "People like you are just pathetic, always looking for sympathy." Miles gritted his teeth. "If sympathy is what you think people feel, then you're blind too. They come here because they want to, because they enjoy it." The man shook his head, a disgusted look on his face. "Keep telling yourself that." He turned on his heel, walking away with Miles's tip jar in his hand. "Hey!" Miles called out, his voice louder than he'd intended. "Get back here!" The man didn't stop. He strode confidently across the square, the jar swinging in his hand as though it belonged to him. Miles tried to follow, his steps uncertain, his hands reaching out to feel the way. "Someone help! He's stealing from me!" But the square was nearly empty, the few people present avoiding the confrontation. Miles's heart pounded, frustration and helplessness twisting inside him as he realized there was nothing he could do. Then, he heard another set of footsteps approaching quickly, firm and purposeful. As the man strutted away with the tip jar swinging carelessly in his hand, Miles felt his hope dwindling. He could hear the sound of each of his own strained breaths, the frustration and helplessness mingling into a silent rage. But then, footsteps, strong, deliberate, approached from the opposite direction. "Hey, sir, stop right there!" a voice commanded, firm and authoritative. The man's footsteps halted, and there was a brief pause before he scoffed. "What now?" Miles could make out the sound of boots approaching, their rhythm calm but determined. Whoever this was, they had authority. Miles felt a flicker of relief, hoping that maybe, just maybe, this could be his help. "Sir, I'm going to need you to hand over that jar," the new voice said, calm but unwavering. "Oh, come on. You think I'd really steal from some blind guy?" the man replied, a smug laugh laced in his words. "It's just a misunderstanding. I was just giving him a hand, that's all." "Is that right?" the authoritative voice replied coolly. "So why did I hear him calling out for help?" The man's smug tone slipped. "Look, officer, name's Officer Ramirez, and from where I'm standing, this looks a lot like theft." Miles could hear the officer's tone shift slightly, a steely edge entering his words. "I suggest you hand over that jar before this gets more serious." There was a brief silence, broken only by the faint clinking of coins, as the man reluctantly held out the jar. Miles's heart lifted a little as he listened to the officer take it back. "All right," the officer said, his voice lowering slightly as he turned toward Miles. "Sir, are you all right?" Miles nodded, though he felt shaky. "Yes, thank you. That man, he just walked up to me, started saying things, and took my money. I couldn't do anything about it." The officer's voice softened. I'm sorry you had to go through that. We're going to make sure he answers for this. The man scoffed again, trying to regain his composure. Are you kidding me? This is ridiculous. You're making a big deal out of nothing. I didn't do anything wrong. Officer Ramirez turned back to him, his tone all business. Nothing wrong? Harassing a man, taking his belongings and trying to walk away with them? He let the question hang in the air, his stance firm. This isn't the first time someone thought they could get away with something like this. But it stops here. The man's tone turned defensive. Oh, I get it. You're one of those bleeding hearts, always taking their side. Just because he's blind, you think he's some kind of saint, right? Ramirez's voice dropped to a deadly calm. This has nothing to do with sides. It's about right and wrong. The man huffed, his voice dripping with disdain. You're ruining my day over a couple of coins. Ridiculous. Officer Ramirez's patience was wearing thin, evident in the tightness of his voice. Whether it's a couple of coins or anything else, it's still theft. Now, let's go. We'll let the judge decide if it's ridiculous. Miles could sense the shift in the officer's stance, the sound of handcuffs clicking open. The man's voice grew panicked. Wait, this isn't necessary. I'll just leave. I won't come back here, okay? Sir, I think you're the one who needs to learn to take responsibility for your actions. Officer Ramirez said firmly. You didn't hesitate to take advantage of someone you thought was vulnerable. Now it's time to face the consequences. The officer's words hung heavily in the air as he handcuffed the man, who muttered curses under his breath, each one laced with bitterness and resentment. Miles let out a slow breath, the tension in his chest beginning to release. Thank you, officer. Really? Officer Ramirez walked over, placing the tip jar back into Miles's hands gently. You don't need to thank me. People like him think they can get away with whatever they want, but not today. Miles nodded, gripping the jar tightly. It means a lot. I felt alone out here. Ramirez's voice softened. You're not alone, sir. Not as long as there's someone willing to stand up for what's right. As Officer Ramirez began to lead the man away, the man's voice rang out, seething with anger. This is gonna cost you. People like me don't get locked up for things like this. I'll be out in no time, and you'll be the one regretting it. But Officer Ramirez didn't respond, maintaining his calm as he led the man toward the squad car waiting nearby. Miles listened as they walked away, the sound of the man's protests fading with each step. Left alone in the square again, Miles held onto his saxophone, feeling a quiet strength returning. The world wasn't always fair, but today he felt seen. The commotion hadn't gone unnoticed. As Officer Ramirez led the man toward the squad car parked just outside the square, a few people had gathered, their faces a mix of curiosity and surprise. Miles could hear the faint murmurs, voices wondering aloud about the situation unfolding. Isn't that the guy who's always playing here? A woman's voice whispered from nearby. Yeah, he's so talented, another replied. What happened? He got robbed, I think, someone else muttered, anger evident in their tone. Miles couldn't see the faces around him, but he felt their presence, the quiet hum of the crowd offering an unexpected reassurance. For so long he'd been used to people turning a blind eye, to standing alone against the occasional cruelty of strangers. But today, he wasn't alone. The man being arrested, however, was clearly aware of the attention and didn't appreciate it. He twisted his head, glaring at the small crowd as they whispered among themselves. His voice came out loud and venomous. What are you all looking at? Huh? Haven't you ever seen a misunderstanding before? Officer Ramirez's grip on him tightened, but the man wasn't finished. Yeah, go ahead, look. Enjoy the show, he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. This is what it's come to, huh? Getting arrested over pocket change. Unbelievable. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, shifting from curiosity to disgust. Someone in the crowd called out, "Doesn't look like pocket change to me. Seems like you were taking a lot more than that." The man turned to the voice, his face twisted with anger. "You don't know anything. Just mind your own business. Maybe you should have minded yours." Another voice shot back, loud and unflinching. Miles listened, feeling a sense of justice in the support he was receiving. He could feel a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth as the bystanders backed him up. He'd never heard these people's voices before, but their words carried the weight of allies. Officer Ramirez gently tugged the man toward the squad car, his tone calm but firm. "Let's go. I think you've said enough," the man muttered under his breath, still glaring at the crowd. "This is a joke. All over some coins? This guy doesn't even need them. He's just sitting here playing his little pity tunes. It's not like he's doing anything important. A sharp intake of breath echoed from someone in the crowd, followed by an indignant shout. How dare you? He's out here every day sharing his talent with all of us. And you think you can just take from him? Miles's chest tightened as he heard the words. He'd always played for himself, for the joy of making music. But hearing these strangers defend him, hearing their appreciation, filled him with a quiet pride. He wasn't invisible to them. His music, his presence, it mattered. The man rolled his eyes, scoffing. Oh, please. You're all acting like he's some kind of hero. He's just another street performer. A firm voice interrupted, louder this time. Maybe you should learn some respect. He's out here every day, bringing joy to people's lives. What have you done besides cause trouble? The man went silent, his face contorting in anger and embarrassment as the crowd's support grew stronger. He had nothing to say in the face of their indignation, his words faltering as more voices joined in, condemning his actions. Officer Ramirez finally reached the squad car, opening the door and guiding the man inside. Before closing the door, he turned back to the crowd, offering a small nod. Thank you for speaking up, folks. We'll handle it from here. As the officer shut the door, the man's voice could be heard one last time, muffled but furious. You'll regret this. I'll get my lawyer, and then we'll see who has the last word. The officer ignored him, turning back to Miles. He walked over, the calm assurance in his voice steadying. Are you all right, sir? Do you need anything else? Miles shook his head slowly, letting the moment settle around him. No, officer. Thank you. Just thank you. Officer Ramirez offered him a kind smile. We'll make sure he's held accountable. If you're up for it, you're welcome to press charges. Miles nodded. I'll do it. I want to see this through. The officer nodded approvingly. I'll contact you soon. We'll need your testimony to move forward. As Officer Ramirez headed back to the squad car, the bystanders lingered, a few of them walking over to check on Miles. One voice, soft and familiar, spoke close by. You're really something, you know that. Don't let people like him get to you. Miles turned his head toward the voice, offering a faint smile. Thank you. I'll be all right. Another person placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, squeezing it briefly. Keep playing, okay? We love hearing you out here. Miles' throat tightened with gratitude. I will. Thank you. The crowd began to disperse, their words of encouragement echoing in his mind as they walked away. Miles took a deep breath, his fingers tracing the familiar edges of his saxophone. He'd come here to play music, to share a piece of himself with this city, and despite everything, he knew he'd be back tomorrow. For now, though, he needed a moment to process what had happened. He held onto his saxophone, feeling the weight of it in his hands, and let himself sit in the quiet resolve of knowing that today he hadn't been alone. The days after the incident in the square were a blur of emotions for Miles. He hadn't expected the encounter to go any further than the humiliating moment he'd endured. But as the security footage circulated, everything changed. The video spread rapidly across social media, igniting anger, sympathy, and a wave of public support. People who'd never met Miles now felt a connection to him, his story resonating far beyond the city square. It was strange, almost surreal to hear his name and his story spoken about on the news, to receive messages of support from strangers, and to feel, for the first time, that people truly saw him. Officer Ramirez called a few days later, offering to help him press charges. At first, Miles hesitated. He was a musician, not a fighter, and he hadn't set out to make a statement. But as he thought it over, he realized that moving forward with charges wasn't just about himself. It was about standing up for everyone who had to face that kind of hatred in silence. He could still feel the echoes of the man's taunts, the lingering sting of helplessness, and he knew that he couldn't let it go. The courtroom was packed on the day of the trial. News reporters filled the back row, their voices low but urgent, recording details for the public hungry to hear the outcome. Spectators filled the benches, a few familiar faces among them, locals who'd seen him play in the square, fellow musicians, even strangers who'd come to support him. It felt like a sea of unseen eyes surrounding him, watching, waiting for justice. Miles adjusted his suit as he took his place beside the prosecutor, feeling both out of place and determined. The prosecutor leaned over, his voice steady and encouraging. We're ready, Mr. Anderson. You don't need to prove anything. Just tell the truth. Miles nodded, taking a deep breath. The truth was all he had, but now he could feel its power. The judge called the court to order, and the trial began. Across the room, Travis sat at the defense table, his expression taut and guarded. The sneering arrogance he'd shown in the square was gone, replaced by a tightly controlled politeness. His lawyer, sharp-eyed and quick-talking, stood to address the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, my client is a respected man with no criminal record, no history of aggression. What happened in the square was a simple misunderstanding, a lapse in judgment in a moment taken out of context." The lawyer gestured to Travis, who nodded slightly, his face a careful mask of remorse. Miles resisted the urge to clench his fists, forcing himself to remain calm. He knew what had happened. He knew the truth. The prosecutor stepped forward, his voice clear. "The court will now view the security footage from the square." The lights dimmed, and the courtroom fell silent as the screen flickered to life. Miles couldn't see the images, but he could hear every shift in the room as the events played out. Travis's voice, harsh and dripping with contempt, echoed in the silent room. His insults, his sneers, the sound of him kicking the tip jar, they filled the room with a weight that was impossible to ignore. Miles felt the tension in the air, heard soft gasps and murmurs ripple through the crowd. His heart pounded as the video continued, every insult replaying for everyone to see. When the footage ended, the room sat in heavy silence. The prosecutor then called Miles to the stand. He stood slowly, making his way up, his steps steady. After swearing to tell the truth, he took his seat, gripping the edge of the witness box. "Mr. Anderson," the prosecutor began, his tone gentle, "could you tell us, in your own words, what happened that day?" Miles took a deep breath, letting the memory of the square fill him. "I was playing my saxophone. It's something I do almost every day. I play for the people passing by. That's when he approached me. At first he just said things, mocking me. I tried to ignore it, but then he kicked over my tip jar. He took the money I'd earned, and when I asked him to stop, he took the whole jar." The prosecutor nodded, his expression sympathetic. "And how did that make you feel, Mr. Anderson?" Miles paused, choosing his words carefully. "I felt small, helpless. I couldn't see him. I couldn't stop him. He thought he could get away with it because I couldn't fight back." "Thank you, Mr. Anderson. No further questions." The defense attorney stood up next, a confident smile on his face. He approached Miles, his voice smooth and almost patronizing. "Mr. Anderson, you've said you felt helpless. Are you sure you didn't misunderstand my client's intentions? Sometimes people joke around in poor taste, and things can be taken out of context." Miles kept his voice steady. "This wasn't a joke. He knew exactly what he was doing." The lawyer's smile faltered. "So you're saying that my client intended to harm you?" Miles didn't hesitate. "Yes. He did everything he could to make me feel powerless. And he did it because he thought he could get away with it." The lawyer's smile faded as he glanced back at Travis. No further questions. Miles returned to his seat beside the prosecutor, feeling the support of the spectators behind him, a quiet but steady presence. Next, Officer Ramirez took the stand, recounting how he had found Travis walking away with the tip jar, his behavior arrogant and dismissive. Ramirez's testimony was clear and unwavering, detailing the disrespect and hostility Travis had shown, leaving no room for doubt. When the jury retired to deliberate, the room was tense with anticipation. Miles sat quietly, the minutes stretching into what felt like hours. Finally, the jury filed back in, and the foreman stood, holding a small piece of paper. The judge asked for the verdict, and the foreman cleared his throat, his voice echoing through the room. "We find the defendant guilty." A murmur of relief rippled through the courtroom. Travis's face remained stony, his jaw clenched tight, but his eyes betrayed his anger. The judge handed down a sentence of community service and probation, noting that this behavior had no place in society, but that it should serve as a lesson. As the courtroom emptied, Miles felt the weight lift from his shoulders. He had stood up for himself, told his story, and people had listened. He had faced the taunts, the humiliation, and now, finally, the world had seen him for who he was. As he stepped out into the courthouse hall, he felt something new, pride. The courthouse hall was quiet as Miles made his way out, the weight of the trial beginning to lift. He felt exhausted, drained by the intensity of reliving that day and exposing so much of himself. But there was also a quiet satisfaction settling in, a sense of dignity reclaimed. Justice, he thought, might not fix everything, but today it had given him something back. As he exited the courthouse, a small crowd waited outside, faces he'd seen from the courtroom and a few new ones. Strangers who had seen his story, friends who had come to support him, people who had felt moved by what he'd endured. The crowd began to applaud, a few people calling out words of encouragement. "We're with you, Miles," someone shouted. "Keep playing, man," said another voice, warm and full of respect. A faint smile tugged at Miles's lips as he waved in the direction of the voices. He'd never expected his story to mean so much to others. Never anticipated that his own quiet resilience would resonate so far beyond the square. For so long, he had played simply because he loved it, never thinking he would end up standing for something so public, so powerful. As he made his way through the small crowd, someone tapped him lightly on the shoulder. A familiar voice spoke close to his ear. "Miles, it's Martin," his friend and fellow musician said. Martin's tone was hushed, almost conspiratorial. "Did you hear what happened to that guy?" Miles turned his head. His curiosity piqued. "No, I haven't heard anything yet." Martin gave a low chuckle, his voice edged with satisfaction. "Well, let's just say he got what was coming to him. Word is, he lost his job. Soon as the video went viral and people figured out who he was, his company couldn't get rid of him fast enough. They didn't want anything to do with someone who'd been caught acting like that." Miles absorbed the words, feeling an unexpected weight lift from his shoulders. He lost his job. The words felt strange as he said them aloud. It wasn't that he'd wanted revenge. He'd only wanted accountability, for someone to finally tell that man he couldn't get away with it. But this was something more. "Yep," Martin continued. "And that's not all. Apparently his wife left him too. The whole thing's blown up. People aren't letting it go." Miles was quiet for a moment, letting the information sink in. The man who had humiliated him, who had tried to strip him of his dignity, had finally faced consequences he couldn't wriggle out of. It was ironic, almost poetic. For someone who'd thought himself untouchable, above reproach, he had been brought down by his own actions, exposed by his own cruelty. But mixed with that sense of justice, Miles felt a pang of sadness. Despite everything, he couldn't help feeling that it was a shame the man had built his life on such a foundation of hate. Miles had spent years overcoming the limitations others tried to impose on him, learning to navigate the world with quiet pride and resilience. And now, the man who had mocked him, who'd tried to strip him of his worth, had lost everything in the end, by his own hand. Martin seemed to pick up on his thoughts. "Don't feel sorry for him, Miles," he said, his voice firm but kind. "He did this to himself. You just showed the world who he really is." Miles nodded slowly. "I know. And I didn't want him to lose everything. I just wanted him to understand." Martin let out a sigh, his hand resting reassuringly on Miles's shoulder. "Maybe now he will, or maybe he won't. But what matters is that you stood up for yourself. You didn't let him get away with it." Miles gave a small smile. "Yeah, you're right." He paused, the realization settling deeper. "Maybe it's not my job to worry about what he learns from this. All I can do is keep playing." "Exactly," Martin replied with a grin. "And I know a lot of us would be more than happy to hear you play again. You're not just out there for yourself anymore, Miles. People are listening now. You're making a difference." Miles felt a warmth spread through him at the words, the quiet satisfaction of knowing he'd done the right thing. For so long, he'd thought of his music as something small, something just for himself and those who chose to listen. But now, he understood that he had a voice, one that could be heard beyond the square, beyond the music. As he walked away from the courthouse, Miles thought of the square and the familiar spot where he'd return to play. He knew the next time he set up his saxophone, he wouldn't be standing alone. He was part of something larger now, a symbol of resilience, a quiet defiance in the face of hate. And with that thought, he felt ready to play again, not just for himself, but for everyone who needed to hear his song. The square was alive with the sounds of the city, a busy hum of footsteps, laughter, and distant conversations. It felt almost like any other day, as Miles took his place in his usual spot, feeling the familiar textures of the square beneath his feet, the rough cobblestone and cool breeze brushing against his face. But today, there was a different energy around him, something lighter, stronger. As he unpacked his saxophone, he could hear a few people murmuring nearby. He caught snippets of their words, people whispering to one another, mentioning his name with a mix of admiration and awe. He could sense them watching, their quiet encouragement surrounding him. And he felt that he was no longer just a musician playing in a city square. He was part of something larger, his story woven into the community around him. Taking a deep breath, Miles lifted his saxophone to his lips, closing his eyes as he let the music pour out of him. The first notes rose up, rich and soulful, carrying with them everything he'd felt in the last few weeks. The anger, the hurt, the hope, and the quiet triumph of knowing he'd stood up for himself and been heard. The melody flowed from his heart, filling the square, a voice that reached every corner. People began to gather, drawn by the music's familiar pull. Faces turned toward him, a mix of strangers and familiar figures, and even a few friends who had supported him during the trial. He felt their presence, their quiet appreciation, as they stood and listened, letting the music settle over them like a balm. For them, he was more than just a street musician. He was a reminder that dignity couldn't be taken, no matter how hard others tried. A child walked over, dropping a few coins into the new tip jar someone had gifted him, a gesture that spoke louder than any words. One by one, others followed, adding to the jar, each coin a silent show of support, an acknowledgement of the resilience he'd shown. Miles continued to play, feeling their kindness warm him from the inside out. After a while, he paused, lowering the saxophone for a moment, letting the notes hang in the air as the crowd watched him. A young woman stepped forward, her voice soft but confident. "Thank you, Miles. We missed hearing you play," she said, her eyes filled with sincerity. Miles gave a small nod, a smile spreading across his face. "Thank you. I missed this too." He lifted his saxophone again, prepared to continue, but he paused, choosing his words carefully. "I play because it's what I love. But now, I play for everyone who's ever had to fight to be heard, for everyone who's ever felt small." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, and a few people clapped softly, their applause filled with a shared understanding. In that moment, Miles felt a deep connection to each of them, a bond forged not only through his music, but through the silent resilience they all carried. He resumed playing, letting the melody shift into something hopeful, bright. Each note was a promise, a reminder of his journey, and a celebration of everything he'd overcome. The square felt like a haven, a place where he could pour his soul into each note, knowing that those around him understood that they too carried the weight of a world that often overlooked them. As the song came to an end, the crowd erupted in applause, louder and more heartfelt than any he'd ever received. Miles felt a lump rise in his throat, his heart swelling with gratitude. He'd returned to the square the same musician he'd always been, yet now he understood his purpose with new clarity. When the applause died down, he set his saxophone aside and stood quietly, taking in the sounds, the voices, the city that had become his audience and his support. He hadn't set out to change anything, but somehow his story had touched others, creating a ripple that extended far beyond him. For the first time in a long while, Miles felt whole, his spirit as steady and unshakable as his music. And as he lifted the saxophone once more, he knew he would keep playing, for himself, for those who'd stood by him, and for every silent voice that deserved to be heard.